This is Tom Cox, your host for Tom on Leadership here on the Link to Leadership Radio Network, now in 2014, co-broadcasting with Oregon Business Magazine. I'm delighted to have as my guest today on this 15-minute interview, Kent Lewis, the head of Formic Media and of Anvil Media, soon to be merged, in fact, and I want to get his take on some of not just the timely things that have happened for him and his organization the last year, what he sees in the year ahead, but also some of the timeless questions around leadership and how he has learned to take on that mantle. So let's start with, Kent, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to be where you are today, the head of two highly regarded organizations that you plan to merge in the near future.
Well, first of all, I'm glad we're on audio because I'm blushing over here, but thank you. I actually, having been involved with entrepreneur groups and entrepreneurial ventures for years, I can't tell you the moment I was an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur by default in that I kept getting fired. So after the second time I got fired from an agency that I co-founded, I realized I may not be employable. So that's when I hung the shingle Anvil Media in 2000. So we just celebrated we're in our 14th year at Anvil. And
14 years. Now,
yeah,
that is outstanding.
In internet years, that's 100-something.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, and most organizations go out of business in the first year or two to make
We're in
it
that
5 years.
1 percentile at 14.
At 14, that's astonishing.
And it's, of course, there must be the second 7-year itch because it's been a wild and wacky year at Anvil. Interestingly, having been at 10 agencies or been involved with 10 agencies, including Anvil and Formic, I thought I'd seen it all and done it all, but that proved completely wrong this year.
Okay.
Backing up a little bit, the main arc of the story is that Anvil started as one of the few search engine marketing agencies in Portland. Then I wanted to grow it to be most respected, which I think is a hard thing to do because it requires you to do world-class work and hire and retain world-class people. And I've largely been able to do that from 2004 to 2008. But one of the victims of success was my entrepreneurial friends and small businesses. I had overpriced and overcomplicated Anvil to work with smaller business. And my agency partners were asking for lower rates, and I just felt like I was trapped. So I had tested lower price points and so forth, and it just wasn't working. So in fall of 2008, I launched Formic Media, which was the small business agency partner, strategic partner alternative to Anvil. And again, Formic was a victim of its own success in that they grew very slowly, methodically, carefully. The first year was a disaster and a loss.
We talk about the internet, and you're growing slowly and methodically.
Right. Well, that's the thing is I learned a few lessons. The first is having co-founded Email ROI, now eROI.
Right.
My startup capital was $500 for that because 3 partners went in $500 each for business cards.
Nice.
We shoestringed that for a year, and Anvil had been paying my bills while we were doing that. And then with Anvil, I founded that with $1,285 for a Sony Vaio laptop, and that's how I started that. So when I launched Formic, I was like, well, 25 grand should be more than enough to get through the first couple months. Turns out I was wrong. When you hire expensive people, which I wasn't used to doing because I always did it myself.
Right.
And the first 25 grand lasted less than 3 months, and then I had to put another 10 grand in to keep it going.
Right.
By the end of the year, they were break even in that it cost me 35 grand to figure out whether or not I wanted to continue that business. Well, I'm grateful I did because I ended up putting the right people in the right seats on the bus, and Formic just crested $1 million in revenue this year after a nice steady build.
Okay.
And with only 6 employees. So I'm really proud of what they had done. Well, 2 things started to happen this year, which was I noticed a level of unhappiness in myself and in others of the team at Anvil, and I couldn't figure out for the life of me why. We were, even though we peaked in 2011 from a revenue standpoint from big clients like Borders Books and Real Networks, we fired one and lost the other, kind of went in-house in 2012, so a couple $100,000 less, so we went from 2.7 to 2.4 million. This year will just be above 2 million, and another year of sliding as we rebuilt the company.
Right.
But what I realized was I didn't enjoy coming to work pretty much in Q1. And this is separate from the drama of the previous year of hiring and not having a successful CEO experience as I tried to step out of the business.
Right.
So I rebuilt it 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, and then I had to rebuild it again last 8 or 9 months.
It's just like a difficult car, isn't it? You're constantly
I would say that I thought it was a Ferrari, and it was more like a Ford Fiesta, in that it needed a good amount of tuning.
Yeah.
So what happened was, actually, I'll be more specific. I think it was like I used to own an Integra Type R, a little hot rod of a small engine, great gas mileage, great performance, not a lot of torque, but I could tear it up on the track.
Right.
Well, then, I think what I did is I had the fastest little sports car out there a couple of years ago, and my first lesson in that was be very wary of high profits, because the profitability masked a lot of problems 2 years ago.
Right.
So why I couldn't see the forest through the trees? Why would I tinker with something that wasn't broken? So
the halo effect.
Ask the family of the owners of the Oregonian, ask Hollywood Video or the buyers of Hollywood Video. Why tinker with something that makes you millions of dollars?
Or General Motors. I mean, it's easy to look at a profitable operation and think, I must be a genius.
Yes.
Look how well we're doing.
And
there must be nothing broken. And so you look for nothing to be broken and you find nothing.
I was a big genius back then. And I was surrounded by a brilliant team. So they made me look good. And, 5 years consecutive growth, fastest growing company. It's like, what's wrong with this picture? And then I found out the hard way that, my longest term employees weren't happy. They didn't really, I lost connection with them.
Yeah.
Wasn't able to tap their full potential. And so basically in April, I came up with this credo just to get me to go back to work. And when I shared that with the team, and it was under less than desirable conditions, somebody had leaked something, so I had to get on the phone and call a few people, and they... and it didn't. I wasn't able to present in person the concept then. And by the time I did to the entire team, certain people had already made up their minds. I don't know what this guy is doing, but I'm out of here.
Right.
So
right. Well, if they had one foot out the door already,
things were going south. And to this day, I struggle to figure out where I lost touch and how I lost eye off the ball. And I've spent some time on that. But what I will say is that I knew that I needed to create a lightning rod, and that's what the credo was. Is it repelled certain people, and it attracted others. So for every person that left, since in the last 8 months, I've attracted 2 more people that are interested in the credo. It actually is a beacon for them.
Okay.
So think of it as it's a magnetic force. It attracted and repelled.
Sure. And isn't that what you want to do as early as possible in the hiring process moving forward?
Yep.
And of course, there's this huge connection between your hiring of your team and the culture you're creating, because every new hire creates the new culture.
Right. And so, what I realized back when the 5-alarm fire started, when I literally presented the credo and half my team left within 2 weeks, and was that I was like, well, maybe I should look at bringing, and this is one of my former employees suggested, have you thought about merging Anvil and Formic? I'm like, every year I think about it, but it doesn't. What happened was Formic had one big account this year that I can't name specifically, but just think in the automotive space with 430 locations across the U.S., which meant in January at our offsite we determined we want to do, led by John McPhee, our current VP of the entire new entity, was he was passionate about local search and the small business, but he realized multi-location retail is the scale that we want. Rather than 50 individual jewelers, we want a chain of 50 stores from one jeweler.
Right, that way you got one account, but you're still doing all the power of localization.
Right. So in early March, I got a lead from a former partner of ours saying, I've got this client and they need local search help. And I handed it to John and said, here's your opportunity. And he closed it. They serviced it. They're still finishing up this initial project, which accounts for 100% of our growth this year. And so Formic's growth will be north of 30% growth this year.
Okay.
After barely double-digit growth previous years, 5 to 10% growth.
Okay. So that is, I want to ask you 2 questions about that. One is, what is your target for annual growth? Do you have a minimum and a maximum?
Well, it's funny because I know that you talked about, there's a line item here to talk about budgeting, and I never really, I'd always set growth goals, but the irony is that when we got to $500,000 at Formic a couple of years ago, I was like, all right, next year's $1 million. And then we get to from 500 to 600, and then I was like, okay, next year's $1 million, and then we get to 650.
Because it's a magic number to
then
do
we
$1
get
million.
to 7, and so the year's stretch goal this year, once we saw we got this big account and led to potentially another account. If we'd been doing ongoing, we would have tripled our revenue. We would have been at 2.1 million. We would have technically surpassed Anvil.
Which is a dangerous level of growth. frankly.
Dangerous, frankly. Instead, that went from an ongoing to a project, and then the other project went from huge to tiny.
Oh.
And so we went from potentially 200%, 300% growth to 35% growth, which was still a record year, amazing year, much more profitable work, very rewarding. It was great that John and the team set a goal and a direction. I was able to support that, and we were successful. But interestingly, growth goals, Anvil, same thing. I was like, oh, I want to get to 3 million back when we had 2.7 2 years ago. Then the next year I want to get to 3 million, then it was 2.4. And then this year it was like 3 million, we get to 2 million. So my former executive team really pushed back on these goals, and rightly so. And what I would say to that is, I've learned in my life, and some of my former employees showed me I extol the power of goal setting. And what ended up happening is we set those, if you don't set goals, you don't achieve them. But their concern was, if you set too high of a goal, is it deconstructive? And what I found was like, no, I still want to have this 3 million in my mind every day. How do I get there? And then if I hit 2.8 or 2.5, or in this case even 2, it's like, well, we didn't get there. Let's plan for how are we going to get there next year, which is, again, my goal. So the combined entity will be $3 million as of January 1st. So
that is how some people hit their revenue growth goals.
Acquisition.
They acquire.
I did it. So I guess you're right. Thank you for letting me pat myself. But ironically, last year, if we combined, it was probably 3.3 or 3.4 if I combine them.
Yeah.
So,
gosh, if only you'd worked then, you would have hit.
No, I'm sorry. Formic made up a lot of what we lost this year.
Okay.
So it's within 100,000 or something. But the point is, my goal is stretch goal next year is 5.
Okay.
And but I have also an aggressive profit goal, which leads to budgeting, which is
right.
I surprised you by saying I have not really done budgeting.
No, you didn't surprise me in the slightest. I'm used to that.
Okay.
It's sad and tragic, and the reality is that you say budget, and the only people whose eyes light up are the accountants.
Yes.
Not even the finance people, just the accountants. Mm-hmm. And
budget versus actual.
And everyone else goes, oh God, I'm going to get beaten with a stick.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't want to give you a target or a goal or a spending or anything, because you're just going to beat me with it later.
Right.
I don't know what the future holds. Leave me alone. And so to that I say, yeah, and if you aren't able to project your unit costs effectively for your activities, you don't know up from down, and you can't steer.
Right.
And so, while goals may or may not be useful, a lack of budget discipline and a lack of cost understanding is potentially fatal, but it's also the rule rather than the exception in small businesses, which is probably what you're hearing in the self-improvement activities you're undertaking with EO, the Entrepreneurs Organization,
and Portland Ad Fed.
Portland Ad Federation, and their CEOs Roundtable.
So a couple of thoughts there. One is I have a very keen understanding of what our margins are because we have a blended rate that I know exactly what I'm charging clients per hour, and I know what our team's utilization is.
Right.
And our services are all the same blended rate, so the unit price is the same.
Right.
But to budgeting in terms of the only budgets I set are what are our marketing budget and what is our fund committee budget, which is our weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual budget to do cool things like our field trips and our
fund committee.
Yeah, so it sounds silly to have a fund committee. It sounds forced.
Yeah,
but
it could be. Yeah,
it's part of an engineered way. It's a way to help engineer culture. It's not the sole component. It's one of many components of our culture.
Well, it means you're taking culture seriously, which, as the owner, you'd better if you want to have a continuing successful organization. How do you keep the fund committee from being some sort of like mandatory corporate fund, god-awful, horrible thing?
Well, that's the thing is we've gone all over the map to where certain people kept being by default on the fund committee, and we're like really frustrated that others wouldn't join. So what we did with the merger is I've got my operations manager and a representative from Anvil and a representative from the Formic team is the new fund committee that plans our quarterly field trips and other activities. They're accountable for engaging the team as appropriate. But we've had a fund committee for probably 7-8 years, and it's been very successful. And that originally what I learned was the original fund committee was the executive team. And that was a mistake because you need the people to determine what the people want to do.
Right. Hey, I want to ask you a few more things, but I'm going to wrap up this segment. I'm Tom Cox, interviewing Kent Lewis of Anvil and Formic, soon to be renamed
Anvil Media.
Anvil
We're just going to
Media.
roll it in.
And the Formic name will go away. You're listening to the Tom on Leadership broadcast, courtesy of Oregon Business Magazine, kicking off our 2014 interview series. Thanks so much for listening, and do tune back in for the next episode.